All right, let's dive right into this explainer. You ever wonder what actually holds the global economy together? It's not just money, and it's definitely not just physical infrastructure. We are going to reveal the hidden operating system that powers the entire business world, corporate law. It's the invisible scaffolding that allows both a small startup in a garage and a massive multinational conglomerate to function day in and day out. Just to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this topic, let's look at the numbers. Consider this staggering statistic from the World Bank. Over 90% of formal businesses worldwide operate under these specific corporate or company law structures. 90%. That means almost every single product you buy, every service you use, and every paycheck you receive is tied directly to this legal framework. So we're going to break this complex scaffolding down into 5 logical steps: the blueprint of business, core principles, the corporate law toolkit, real-world corporate stress tests, and finally, navigating a global landscape. All right, step 1, the blueprint of business. At its core, corporate law is basically the operating manual. It's the set of rules that gives businesses a structured, predictable way to interact with the rest of the world. It dictates exactly how a company is formed, managed, regulated, and even how it's dissolved. Imagine trying to run a business where investors, employees, and suppliers have absolutely no guaranteed rights and no way to hold anyone accountable. It would be complete chaos, right? Corporate law creates stability, predictability, and, most importantly, trust in commercial markets. And the macroeconomic payoff here is massive. According to the OECD, countries with strong corporate legal frameworks attract up to 30% higher levels of foreign direct investment. 30%! When investors actually trust the legal system to protect their capital and ensure fair play, well, they open their wallets. Good law literally generates wealth. Moving on to step 2, core principles. Okay, so this is one of the most fascinating concepts in all of commerce: separate legal personality. In the eyes of the law, the business itself actually becomes an artificial person. This was a totally revolutionary concept that got locked in back in 1897 with a landmark case called Solomon vs. A. Solomon. Because the company is its own legal entity, it can own property, sign contracts, and even sue or be sued entirely in its own name, completely separate from the humans who actually own it. And that leads us right to the ultimate safety net: limited liability. Because the company is technically a separate person, if the business goes bankrupt or gets sued, the shareholders are usually only on the hook for the amount they originally invested. Their personal assets, their houses, their savings accounts, those stay perfectly safe. This one single rule is honestly the engine of global capitalism, because it encourages investment and risk-taking without that paralyzing fear of personal financial ruin. But you can't just hand out superpowers without some ground rules. To balance things out, the law demands strict accountability. We see this through corporate governance, which are basically the rules for how a board of directors has to responsibly manage the ship, and mandatory disclosure and transparency. Companies absolutely have to give accurate financial reports to regulators and shareholders. It's the grand trade-off, really. You get the safety net of limited liability, but you gotta operate in the light. Which brings us to step 3, the corporate law toolkit. Now, these different branches of law aren't just a bunch of dry, boring rules. They're massive financial levers on a global scale. Look at securities law. It protects a staggering $100 trillion market regulated by the SEC in the US alone, giving companies a safe way to raise capital. Then you've got mergers and acquisitions, which drove $3.5 trillion in global restructuring just in 2023. Tax law? That funds roughly 25% of all government revenue in OECD countries, and employment law impacts over 3 billion corporate employees globally, according to the ILO. So, yeah, this toolkit literally shapes human society. And the stakes for misusing this toolkit are, frankly, wild, especially in the fast-growing area of corporate compliance. Take the EU's GDPR, for instance. Failing to comply with their data protection laws can hit a company with catastrophic fines of up to 4% of their global annual turnover. The scaffolding might be invisible, but man, hitting it hurts. All right, on to step 4, real-world corporate stress tests. The evolution of this legal code is basically a highlight reel of catastrophic failures and rapid innovations. We laid the foundation in 1897 with Solomon, then jumped to 2002. The massive Enron scandal completely exposed these huge systemic failures in financial reporting and auditing. That immediately triggered the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in the US, which drastically upgraded government's rules. Fast forward to 2020, and Chinese regulators suspend the massive Ant Group IPO. That perfectly highlights modern state oversight, proving that strict regulatory alignment and risk control are absolutely vital for today's mega tech corporations. Even today, incredibly high-stakes cases are constantly refining this scaffolding all over the world. Over in India, the huge Tata Sons dispute tackled minority shareholder rights and board authority head-on. The Supreme Court there basically stepped in and set clear boundaries, declaring that courts shouldn't interfere in valid commercial decisions unless something is explicitly illegal. That was a massive sigh of relief for corporate boards, giving them the clear direction they need to actually run their companies without constantly looking over their shoulders for judicial micromanagement. Finally, step 5. Navigating a global landscape. Because here's the really tricky part. The rules literally change depending on where you're standing. Multinational companies are constantly having to translate their operations across two huge legal traditions. On one hand, you've got common law jurisdictions, like the UK and the US. Those rely super heavily on judges and historical precedent, which honestly gives them a lot of flexibility to adapt as business models change. But on the other hand, you have civil law jurisdictions, like Germany and Japan. They emphasize highly codified, comprehensive statutes. It's much more rigid, sure, but it provides incredible uniformity and certainty. And it gets even more complicated in emerging economies, which often follow hybrid models. They'll blend those global common or civil law principles with very distinct localized state oversight. But despite all these massive differences, globalization is forcing a steady convergence. Since capital flows everywhere, we're actually seeing this harmonization of global standards, especially in areas like environmental, social, and governance compliance, what we call ESG. The invisible scaffolding is slowly but surely standardizing across the entire globe. So, I'm going to leave you with this thought to ponder. Corporate law is definitely not some dusty old book of static rules. It's a living, breathing code that reacts to human innovation. As we plunge headfirst into this wild era of artificial intelligence, smart contracts, and decentralized digital assets, how is this invisible scaffolding going to adapt next? I mean, could an AI actually be considered a separate legal entity one day? The rules that govern business are evolving faster than ever, and the next great legal revolution? It's already happening right in front of us. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep questioning the structures around you.